To start off, we need to know the difference between financing and funding. Financing and funding are often used interchangeably, yet they have clear and important differences. Let's start with financing. Finance is a broad term. It describes where an organization gets the money needed to undertake a project or an activity. Financing for projects or activities can be raised by the public or private sector and through debt or equity. Any sum of money raised through finance must be repaid. In most cases, organizations are liable to pay back a certain percentage of interest on finance. Now let's compare financing with funding. Funding is a term that refers to money provided by a government or organization for a particular project or activity. Unlike financing, funding is typically provided without any cashback requirement. There may be certain contractual requirements in a funding agreement, but there are typically no requirements to pay back the capital. The most common funding sources are government grants or philanthropic donations from independent organizations. These funding sources typically raise funds through taxpayers, users or customers who ultimately pay for the project or activity in the long term. In short, a simple way to differentiate between financing and funding is that financing comes at a monetary cost to the borrower, whilst funding does not. Making this distinction between finance and funding is crucial because the cost of finance can ultimately have adverse effects on the beneficiary. As mentioned before, these effects can be monetary, such as interest paid on a loan, or non-financial, such as a set of conditions that should be met before financing can be unlocked. Now that we've covered the difference between financing and funding, let's look at another key finance term, which is bankability. A bankable project is one that lenders believe to be likely to generate a sufficient and sustainable return on their investment, and the lenders are therefore willing to provide financing for the project. Financial institutions or investors will only invest in projects that are likely to justify the risk they are taking. So once a project has undergone extensive assessments by an established financial institution and is deemed likely to succeed, it is considered bankable. That project is then typically financed in the form of debt or equity, and a financial return on investment will be required. Next, we will look at more familiar terms like assets and liabilities. An asset can provide an economic benefit or a resource value that can generate revenue. In business or organizations, assets could typically include machinery, vehicles to do work, or cash on hand. Personal assets, on the other hand, may include a car, a house, or solar installation. Now we'll have a look at liabilities. Liabilities could typically be a company's short-term or longer-term obligations that are due. Examples of liabilities could be wages, loans, or rented machinery. Making the distinction between assets and liabilities when considering your project resources provides a useful way to think about the financial implications of the project. Now let's consider an example of assets and liabilities in the municipal context. A solid waste department may have ownership of an existing land site, which is an asset, but may not have the transport to and from the site. If budget is unavailable to purchase a refuse truck outright, there could be two other options, either to rent a truck or purchase a truck through finance, both of which would become a liability for that department. The last finance term we'll look at is concessionality. Concessionality usually happens when a loan agreement is made more attractive or softened. The terms of a loan could be modified by making the loan interest rates below market-related interest rates, or by extending grace periods, or a combination of the two. With concessionality, a borrower is usually given financing if they are able to meet a set of criteria to unlock these discounts or concessions. A good example of this is concessionality given on green buildings. A developer could obtain a concessional loan and pay 9% interest instead of 11%, upon the condition that the building is net zero carbon.